Good afternoon. This is Abdul Toumi from ORSAM at North Africa Studies Department. I am a researcher and an expert on North Africa at ORSAM. So my area focuses mainly on Algeria, Tunisia, and lately on Libya. So we will be covering this session during 1 hour and a half, trying to explain what is going on in North Africa. But the title of our course is Stability and Order, North Africa Geopolitics. So I divided the course into 3 main chapters, and under each chapter, I highlighted 3 sections. So it will go with the following. What is North Africa? Is the region homogeneous? Why do the people in the region identify with one another? Or maybe no. Can we lay down the factors that caused the uprising, meaning the popular revolt? 2, the beginning, Tunisia and Egypt. What characteristics do Tunisia and Egypt hold in common? Why didn't the uprising catch fire in Algeria? What went wrong in Libya? 3rd, how did the regional and superpower react to the uprising? How appropriate the regime change phrase, or the phrase of regime change used by Western power. How do the Arab uprising are shaping balance power in the region? I did also actually work on this course using 2 books and 1 study. Interesting, actually, for who speak French and Arabic. I will start with the English book, is The Arab Uprisings, What Everyone Needs to Know, written by James Calvin, Oxford University. He is a scholar at UCLA University. The other one is Why the Kind of Statement of a scholar and a thinker who passed away just, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, and well known in the Arab world. He was considered as one of the tiers-mondist voice of his time. His name is Samir Amin. The book is in French. Le monde arabe dans la longue durée, un printemps des peuples. So, Arab world, in the long run, the springs of the people, or the people spring, edition Apic. As for the study that was led by scholars, there was an article, like a collective article was written in Arabic. I'm going to say it in Arabic. مجلة سياسات عربية العدد 18/2016. So to start now with our main question, and if you notice, there are many questions. The reason why, because we don't have to answer to all these questions in 1 hour and a half. But as we all know, the region has been in complex context, locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally. So, and all these questions are to some extent fair to be asked. For us, as analysts, researchers, and also people who are paying attention closely to this region, we need to know how to approach these questions in order to better understand what's going on and where we will be heading in the near and long future. So for North Africa, geographically, it's on the African continent. So it's stretching from the Atlantic shores of Mauritania in west to Egypt, Suez Channel, and the Red Sea in the east, to the Mediterranean in the north. So, as you see, of course, unfortunately, I don't have a map, but I'm sure you will picture it or you have an idea about this map in your mind. So you have 2 or 3 main countries that are considered as pivotal state in the sub-regional system, notably Egypt, Algeria, Morocco. I'm not excluding Sudan, but it's also a solid state politically, culturally, and even geopolitically. But we will be focusing on these 3 main countries. So the question is, again, is the region homogeneous? According to its demographic and sociological composition, it's not, because of the other elements that they play in this homogeneity or heterogeneity. So, for instance, the ethnic groups and sometimes sectarian elements, which are less involved and apparent as they are in the east part, meaning in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. So now, why do the people in the region identify with one another? So they do identify with one another, I would say sociologically and politically, because the entire or the majority of those people, they share the same or the common cause of injustice. And when we speak about injustice, it comes with freedom of speech, freedom of movement, because again, unfortunately, within the region and all these countries, of course, they have borders, and on many of them, they request a visa to cross to each other. But and also because of the regime's policies. So the regime's policies are, again, using this to some extent narrative to dominate more their people and kind of pushing hard for any opposite voice or new way of governing or eventually power sharing. For the region, so when we speak about North Africa, so I'm going to stay a little bit or make small or open parentheses about the Maghreb countries. So the 5, say, Western, Northwestern African countries. So you have Mauritania, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. So these 5 countries, their leaders for almost like, actually started, I mean, I'm not, before the independence of these countries, mainly late 50s, early 60s. So the people and some, let's say, maybe sincere political, religious leaders early in the 21st century, they were hoping to create kind of an integral entity for the people and the region, which at that time it called the Star of North Africa. An idea was actually started from in France, from the say Maghreb community immigrants, or who were at that time or in France working. So they wanted to, and also was kind of new wave of political awakening against the French colonization in that region. So they tried, but again, for many reasons, it didn't go through. And then some ideas came later until even after the independence, so which these countries were hoping to create or to have their, again, sub-regional system, like the one was like the CCG in the Gulf countries, just to give you, make like this quick parallel to give you an idea. So the idea of, I mean, and then this system or this sub-regional system called the Arab Maghreb Union, or that it goes with the French acronym UMA. But what went wrong with this sub-regional system? So now back to the homogeneity of the people. So now knowing all these are around, let's say, 80 million people of this sub-regional system, they share, I mean, they have more unified factors than unified them. But the politics and the political leaders, they have been struggling on this to establish finally this system. But the main question, what is the obstacles or what are the obstacles? Because there is not just one obstacle, there are so many obstacles. In the, let's say, post-independence, so the regimes of these countries, so they picked or they choose for ideological political interest their own allies. So some, and during the Cold War, so some they headed east, the others headed west. So meaning by this, some they went to Moscow, others went to Washington. But, and there are some who stayed in between. So let's say, for instance, Algeria after the independence, so they made a clear cut by choosing ideologically to be closer to the East Bloc rather than the West Bloc. On the other hand, the neighbor, again, country, pivotal country, Morocco, did the opposite. Tunisia went to the west. Mauritania was a country, so stayed in between because of political instability at that moment. Libya, it's an interesting case. So Libya went on from a kingdom to, I'm not going to say a popular republic. It's in Arabic, Jamahiriya, so which means masses. So the Republic of the masses. So we don't know what that, I mean, constitutionally speaking, what this does mean. But on North Africa, so we have Egypt. And Egypt at that time, in late 60s, early 70s, was considered as the Arabic pivotal state and also regional power and also the voice of Arab pan-Arabism. So, in an integral process to make this, let's say, 5 countries plus Egypt, so would have, and eventually, why not, Sudan would have been a solid sub-regional system. But as we all know, for political, let's say, trust, because the leaders of this regime didn't, or to some extent are still don't trust each other. So the people felt left off or left alone by their regimes. Then it comes the issue of the injustice. When we speak about injustice with the capital I, so we speak about, let's say, political injustice, such lack of freedom, social injustice, so there are no excellent services, economic injustice, it's a bad management that goes with accountability, which leads to corruption. So now, from these two elements, that led to the question of how this, or what are the causes of the uprising, of the Arab uprising. So we call it Arab uprising because then it spread all over the MENA region. But let's stay in North Africa. So it started in Tunisia, right? In, let's say, late or early winter 2010. But we have to make a quick historical reminder. Even though for these ingredients of people are not happy, people want to do something, want not to, let's say, change the regime by just asking for some reforms or political economic reforms. But at the end of the day, so this, let's say, pot was boiling too much to the point where the needle exploded. So, and don't forget also, there were some popular, let's say, protests and also, to some extent, revolts started in early or in the 80s. Let's say in 81, in Tunisia, I think in 83, 84 also, there were some revolts in Morocco. And then that led to the first Arab Spring, let's say, uprising was in Algeria in October 1988. In Algeria, 1988. So that, which really was, let's say, the birth of the first wave of the Arab uprising. So now we can discuss the issue of spring, winter, whatever, you can use the 4 seasons, but it doesn't matter. So the main thing was the first sincere and actually was a political earthquake in the region. What that was in 1988 in Algeria, October 1988 in Algeria, that pushed or obliged the regime, the Algerian regime, that was a self-ruling party, was run with kind of Soviet mentality and system, which led to or pushed or obliged the regime to answer to the people's demands at that time politically. Even though, to be fair to the Algerian regime in the mid-80s, in 85, 86, and that was due to serious economic crisis, and that which had connection with international context because of the fall of the price of the oil. So the regime started to feel the heat, had launched at that moment some reforms, economic reforms, which the regime at that time was thinking, okay, let's go with smooth transition. But the people couldn't hold it, and they were so tired. In 88, so they took the street and asked for serious and radical change. Okay, so the regime answered in 18, just a year later, the regime approached the people and opened a new area in Algeria of freedom. It was like freedom of speech, freedom of, actually the main political parties, they were solid and exist. They were in opposition, so they become legal. They issued a new constitution with a vocation of law that, unlike the previous one that was in the constitutional program, I mean, of the FLN. The FLN is the ruling party. FLN acronym is Front Libération Nationale, National Liberation Front. So who was leading, governing the country. So then in 1988, so they were open again, freedom. So new political parties emerged. So here those political parties emerged from right, left, centrist, and of course, when we speak now in the region, in our region, so there is what now is called political Islam. At that time, we call it Islamist. So the Algerian Islamists had a political party that entered the political arena and played again with the rule of the game. So that won the election. It started with municipal and departmental election, which led later to parliamentary elections, and then the Islamists under the leading of the FIS, the acronym stands for the Front Islamique du Sahel in French. It's the Salvation Front Party or Islamic Salvation Party that won the majority. But what happened? So the military, because don't forget, so when we talk about the FLN, the party, so the military was where the real power holder. So they didn't like the outcome, so they made a coup, okay? So everything stopped in January 1992. So they obliged the, at that time, the president, or the sitting president, Chatli Benjedid, to resign. And maybe some of you, they know the following or the outcome of that coup, what happened in Algeria for the last, or during 10 years. So now, back to our, to what happened in Tunisia. So why Tunisians rose up against Ben Ali? I would say the same region like the Algerians did. Again, was lack of freedom, political, economic injustice, and of course, we know the narrative of the story that was actually beautiful to sell to the media, Western media, and was happy, to be fair, was my story. so that this poor merchant who was, got upset and was, so he was slapped by a policewoman and he didn't like it. So he went and immolated himself. So this was the spark of the Arab Spring, the second wave of the Arab Spring. So the second wave of Arab Spring was in Tunisia. But the question, even though at this moment, nobody was expecting that this uprising or the Arab, let's say, revolt will spark from Tunisia, because Tunisia, it's a peaceful and wonderful tiny country on the Mediterranean. They don't have a political system. It's kind of, let's say, cohesive. They don't have a military who run and rule the country. They have very strong elite, very, very smart and intelligentsia, good political parties, and again, from left to right, and solid union workers. But the people were kind of dissociated from all of this, that we call them the intermediary core that constitute or that form the state. Because, and Tunisians, they were saying, okay, it's our opportunity. If we don't do it today, we are going to live for so long with Ben Ali regime. So they did it, and they pushed Ben Ali to flee and to go to Saudi Arabia. So, and then, let's say, so if you are in, you are in neighborhood, and you feel this guy is boiling you, and then just one day, okay, so okay, then the smallest or the, I don't know, I don't dare say weakest, but maybe the smallest or the timid man in your neighborhood, he goes to him and then he just come down. I said, okay, so I can do it. So the next door house said, okay, let's do it. That how it started, and of course was kind of the domino effect. And then it went to Egypt. So Egypt is very interesting because Egypt, as we said earlier, it's a pivotal state, it's more than 100 million population, was Egypt, intellectually speaking and culturally, even politically, kind of mecca of the Arab elite. So the people rose up. So the Egyptians said, okay, if the Tunisians did it, why don't we? Okay, so we went on. So they did it. But again, for this politically the same causes, still lack of freedom, socio-economic injustice, and practically you can see the failure of the state. I mean, I'm not saying the state is failing or failed, but the failure of the state for being incompetent and not able to answer to the demands of the people in terms of public policies, like the basic things with education, healthcare, and create more jobs. So you see, you pick these three main, plus then this leads to a housing crisis. You think this, you pick these 3-4 public policies, you understand all the roots of the uprisings. But in Egypt, like in Tunisia, so the military are strong. So therefore, they can make a parallel with Algeria. So you can see these two pivotal states in the region, Algeria and Egypt, Algeria in the region, Algeria and Egypt, both have very, very strong military institution that controls everything. So when you speak about military institution, of course, you can add the intelligence, etc. Plus, again, the political parties that they were kind of just a window boutique or just in front of the window to show that, oh, okay, we have opposition, we have political parties, but they don't play the role of the game that we understand in the West or nowadays in Turkey about political parties that goes with ruling for elections and to eventually be in power one day, or that leads to the alternance of power. But here, so you see, Tunisia don't have military. Egypt has a military. Tunisia is almost like a department in terms of population, according to Egypt, or if you make a parallel to Egypt. But they have something in common, is the real political force at that moment. The real political force that had been structured and also going on for, like in Egypt, for let's say 7 or 8 decades, in Tunisia for more than 3 to 4 decades. So here I'm making reference to the movement of the brothers, or the brothers movement, or Muslim brothers movement in Egypt. So everybody then everybody was panicking about the outcome, about how do we reform, how are we going to let this democratic process go through, knowing that just 2 decades ago, here we are in 2000, let's say 2010, we're in 2010. So just go back to in 1989 or in 1990 in Algeria, what happened? So they're both actually, especially the military in Egypt, they were reading from Algeria's military playbook. But the context was different. At this moment is different, meaning by this, during the elections in Egypt. So it was different than in Algeria in 1990. So in Algeria, in 1990, Algeria was kind of course, it was a shock to the West, the Western power, and notably to the closest regional and regional power, France, for instance. But look what happened when the West and with the complicity, of course, of the so-called liberal Democrats, or we can call them laïque, that sided with the military. So here is, I mean, intellectually, it's an odd couple to see a liberal Democrat siding with a general. It's kind of awkward. But they did it in Algeria. But as a result of that, so we had a civil war in Algeria. Then we had the electroshock of the international system, the 9/11. Then we had Al-Qaeda. Then we started to hear about these extremist Salafis before we got to Daesh lately. But in Egypt, the brothers, when they came in, so they were well organized, well structured. So same thing happened to Islamists in Tunisia. They won the election because of their, let's say, proximity, social proximity to the voter, to the people who vote for in these elections, because they feel are comfortable to vote for Islamists rather than for liberal Democrat or old remnants of the regime. But again, so the experience didn't work well in Egypt, as we understand, as we found out later, but it worked in Tunisia. So the reason why it worked in Tunisia, we give some, let's say, background credit to the leader of the Islamist party or the Islamist establishment in Tunisia, unlike in Egypt. So they hold this element in common is the Islamism, or what we call it nowadays, the political Islam narrative. That is now the boogeyman of the West and the liberals in these countries. But it didn't stop there. So this was started, and then was kind of the abortion of this ray of hope of the Arab Spring. And then we saw what happened again in Yemen, and then in Syria. That was, everybody was saying, this is it, it's the end of the Arab Spring. Let's say, and then some, they were calling it, I mean, the Arab liberals and the nationalists and the so-called Democrats, they were calling it the Arab delusion. So it was delusional for those people who rose up against the regime. And at that moment, any kind of, or any temptation to challenge the regime or to say, okay, I have to do something, was okay. So you won't be like Syria? Oh, no. You won't be like Iraq? No, 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 no. But this didn't stop the persistence of the Arabs in North Africa, notably in Algeria and Sudan. But it's very interesting. I have to, again, put a quick stop here. One would ask, okay, you are talking about Egypt and Tunisia and Algeria, but why don't you mention Morocco? It's a fair question. Morocco did very, very well and excelled its smooth democratic transition that is going on smoothly, has excelled. Why? Because, again, the intelligence, because of the, let's say, realism of the Islamists, of the Justice and Development Party leaders, and also the king relation with all the entire political establishment, including the elite and the labor union. So there is kind of, let's say, a pact between the Islamists and the king. This is why the experience in Morocco, or the uprising that took place in Morocco, has been going on smoothly well. Even though there are, we hear from here and there, some protests, like one linguistic protest, or some other demands for the Moroccan. But this led to the third wave of the Arab Spring. So the third wave of the Arab Spring, which led to the Algerian Hirak that took place in 2019, and to the Sudanese Hirak as well, that they rose up against al-Bashir regime that was ruling them for 30 years. It's practically the same, again, narrative in the storyline about the Algerians who were ruled by the Bouteflika system for 20 years. So this to give you like large picture about the political development, the dynamic of change that has been going on, and also people, they never gave up, even though it was hard, was sometimes deadly, had deadly consequences, but they believed in a cause. Before we move to our third chapter, we have to make, again, a quick stop here about Libya. And then we talk about Egypt and Tunisia and Egypt, but what happened in between is Libya. Libya also rose up against the Gaddafi, the same like the Tunisians did against Ben Ali and the Egyptians did against Mubarak. But in Libya was kind of a unique experience because Gaddafi was, let's say, was the state, the country, was everything. But, and then what went wrong? So the fall of Gaddafi regime, unlike in Egypt and in Tunisia, was implicitly with the help of the Western forces, and notably the military intervention that took place in Libya, led by NATO and some Arab nations. Why Tunisians succeeded relatively their political transition from 2011 to 2014, and then they went on until today. Why the Egyptians succeeded for 1 year or year and a half? I mean, they took part and they went to election and they elected for the first time a president that was elected democratically by the people. In Libya, they didn't have a solid, let's say, or homogeneous elite. And again, as we just mentioned earlier, these political and social intermediary core within the state. So as I said earlier, Gaddafi was everything, and he controlled everything. And also by issuing his famous book, the Green Book, that was almost like a holy book. So it was not, or Libya did not have an institution that one can understand from the Western or the constitutional law concept. Libya didn't have that. And then led to the chaos that unfortunately Libya is or found itself in it today. Now, we cannot leave or leave out the role of the regional and superpower. How did the regional and superpower react to this or to the uprising? Unfortunately, the West likes the East, or they like the South, as long as they keep taking their natural resources for free. And here will take us to the theory of dependence, and we don't have time to go through that deeply, but you have the Bahjat Quran, you mentioned this, spoke about this in the terms of peripheric and the center and how these interactions are going or go, actually still are going. So to the quick answer to this, so the regional power, and here we'll speak about the regional power, the main regional power in that region is France. A little bit the UK, but mainly France. France still sees North Africa as its backyard, and anything moves or doesn't go what Paris wishes has to intervene, has to jump in. So let's say, I don't know if you do remember this, if some of you have been following the Arab uprising, and especially the Tunisian one, and early in the uprising, actually in November, late December, when the French, actually the French Foreign Affairs Minister was debating this in the French Parliament, as if Tunisia was a French department in France, like, you know, Tunisia is still under the French colony. So then the French minister, Foreign Affairs Minister, mentioned or answered to the question in the Q&A session in the Parliament about what went on in Tunisia, where is the Tunisian police? Said, okay, we have the solution, so we need to send them more stakes and share with them intelligence. Okay, so this is the answer. We understand how France will react to the Tunisian uprising, or eventually to the Tunisian democratic process, or to the new Tunisia. In Libya did the same thing. In Libya, they led a coalition and to overthrow Gaddafi. In Egypt, they were in the beginning, because at that time Sarkozy was in power and had kind of, okay, I will go and share the desire of the people. But suddenly, after when the coup occurred during the first actually year of Holland at that time, so he supported the coup, the Sisi regime, and kind of turned on the democratic process that had was going on, and they killed the hope or the ray of hope of the Egyptians. Whereas the Americans, the US, we found ourselves interesting in this during this moment. So the Obama administration was between like a prudent democracy and kind of, if they do it, that's fine. So they accepted to sit with what they called them at that moment, the Islamists. So when Morsi came in to power, was democratically elected, so he represented the his people. I mean, was the leader of in New Egypt. So Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, I think met him twice, and I think even President Morsi made a trip, and he was welcomed in the White House. But later was something going on, and so they again accepted the coup, and like France did, kill the Egyptian people, ray of hope. So in this takes us to how appropriate to the phrase, or we heard regime change used by Western powers. It's a very interesting because again, it's still a rhetoric. I mean, sure, we heard this, you know, what happened in Iraq during the Bush Son administration, and then the invasion of Iraq, and then we are there to change the regime, but we saw the outcome. So the same thing, it's still only a rhetorical phrase that's used just to, let's say, keep the people busy and not losing their national interest. And now more than national interest, now it has become a national security interest, because after that, after these two coups and these two, let's say, turmoil that has been going on in the post second Arab revolts. So we had Daesh, and now Daesh is, or ISIS is spread all over as a supranational movement, not only in, started with Daesh, which stayed for Syria and Iraq, but it becomes a franchise and is in Algeria, now not only in Algeria also, but in the Sahel countries, in Mali and Niger, etc. So this, the idea of the regime change of the West brought, or again, just to distract the people and put in front their national interest and national security interest, now by using the fear factor, like I am here, or I don't allow any political movement in this country, because as a result, we will get these extremists in power. So that's, which is not true, as an analyst and researchers, we all know that. So now the third point is, before I conclude, how the Arab uprising are shaping the balanced power in North Africa. So this led also to the appearance of new actors, new regional actors. And meaning by this, especially in light of the turmoil and the crisis in Libya. So we saw, following this, emerging two axes or two alliances. Here is the emergence of the Arab Emirates, On one hand, with its access, Abu Dhabi, Cairo, Saudi Arabia, then we can add France into it as well. On the other hand, the role of Turkey and Qatar. But today, and especially these days, and maybe into these hours, we are talking about what's going on in the East Mediterranean. And also, it's an interesting point here, we cannot exclude North Africa from the East Mediterranean. And how Turkey today is playing this role by changing or shaping the balanced power in the region. So it's complex because the majority of those people in the North Africa region are in favor to see Turkey play a major role and be in this game. Whereas the, of course, so-called liberal nationalists, they have this anti-Turkish sentiment, making this phantasmic or phantasmatic arguments about Turkey. It sees itself as new, or is going to establish the new Ottoman Empire in the region, and President Erdogan sees himself as the new Sultan of this neo-Ottoman approach, or something, just I'm calling it politics. But okay, so what are the role of Emirates and the Saudis? So how far, I mean, one would ask, what Emirates has to do in Libya or in Algeria or in Tunisia? It's far away, and Emirates, it's a tiny country and it has its own problem. I mean, in the next, I mean, it's on its frontiers. So why is doing this? Well, it's like the American would say, money talks, and it's a check diplomacy or check diplomacy. So, and they found an echo. So why to say, or they say, why don't we do it? To just counter or to block or to some extent, or maybe to corner Turkey from, or to stop Turkey's, like in quote unquote, using it, hegemony in the region. But again, the people are looking forward and want to see the Turkish model be applied in their countries, or at least give it a shot, because we tried, or they're saying, people are saying, we tried other systems, other models, didn't work, so let's try the Turkish model. And to be fair also, Turkey has proved that by improving its economics, its military, its foreign affairs policy, by becoming a serious regional power in the region and playing in the, let's say, Champions League. So with the big players, alike Turkey, because again, one has to say this, Turkey of 2020 is not Turkey of 1920. And Turkey used to be called the sick man. No, Turkey today is a ingenious doctor. I mean, especially that following the COVID-19 crisis, healthcare crisis, and how the government did manage that intelligently and making much, much better progress and success than other countries, like, you know, like France, for instance. But another question also will appear or pop up is why, again, Saudi Arabia and Emirates are playing this role is, again, we said mainly to corner Turkey. But ideologically and politically, these two countries are not adapted with the culture of these, or the people, as we said earlier, we said homogeneous, that sometimes are not are, because they feel they are close to Turkey, then to the Emirates, then to the Saudi Arabia, even though they share one common thing, the language, Arabic. So even though in North Africa, we have other ethnic languages like Tamazight, and because this is due to the presence of the Berber communities in this area that are, I think, around 25 to 30 million across North Africa. So the conclusion is there is this hope, because, or this ray of hope, because the people of today, of 2020, are not like their, or the elders in the 90s, are not giving up. And there is another factor is playing well or in their favor for the youth, is all these social media activities and all this modern technology that are playing a major role to, in terms of like lead or vehicle the information that goes too fast. The only the positive, the inconvenient is the elite and the political parties have lost credibility like their regime. So the regimes. So this is why the people today are kind of, or they feel lost because they are not well structured and well directed to reach the ultimate goal is through organized elections and then challenge the establishment or the regime and kill the mentality of the status quo. And we have seen this experience in Nigeria during the Hirak and still going on. There are other elements also, let's say in Tunisia as well. So despite all this progress, political progress that have been going on for the last system that they will follow, currently are following the parliamentarian system, but it looks is not working because of the coalition system that government has to form a government. I mean, the prime minister has to play all these political games and maneuvers in the parliament with the political parties. So there is actually the president, the Kais Saied, is looking forward to introduce a reform that he might change the regime, the constitutional system from parliamentarian to the presidential. Whereas in Egypt, we still actually don't know what's going on, but it doesn't mean the Egyptians are happy with Sisi. Actually, just, I mean, speaking of the current affair, just a couple hours ago, I mean, we were reading that there are some revolt uprising in the remote of the country, in the rural area. So people, in the end, people are not going to continue to suffer and to wait and see from the regime by just giving them, I mean, governing them with rhetoric and empty slogans like it used to be in the 70s and 80s. So I think this is it, and thank you very much for listening. I hope I wasn't too long. And now we can open the Q&A session, and I will be more than happy to answer to your questions. And thank you very, very much for being patient and listening to me. Thank you. There are questions about Maghreb countries share many similarities, common faith, Islam origins, at least studies shows. There are almost Amazigh Berber similar speaking Arabic on this country, but they did not reach unity. It is okay. So for the first question about the ethnic groups in the Maghreb countries, and especially in Algeria and Morocco, so it's a complex question but I will try to answer it fairly, if I may. So the linguistic issue has been, let's say, complex one for many years, if not decades. But recently, both countries, Algeria and Morocco, have opened up the regimes, or the government have opened or to deal with this question democratically or understandably by letting the country, these languages to be in the, or become official and considered as national languages. Or it's because it's in a power, maybe. Okay, that's. Second question, why Djibouti let a lot of foreign country and start the military base has changed? I think Djibouti, we can add it to North Africa, but it's a little bit Horn of Africa. For Djibouti, it's, you know, it's kind of, I mean, still small country and also still doesn't have a real decision-making independence or autonomy from France. And France still have a major role in Djibouti politics. So, but the Djiboutians or the new administration in Djibouti is trying to diversify its partnership with China. And there is, but don't forget also the Emirates are playing a major role as well, but this with the help of the French. Second question. Will Tunisia, Algeria cooperate and accept the deal reached between Libya and Skhirat, especially if we consider the problem? I think that this is a great question. Yes, which is very good. Actually, it goes for the entire integral system that we have evoked during our intervention of the Arab Union Maghreb. We can add also, which is not a number, but as a neighbor, Egypt also as a pivotal state. Yes, Algeria and Tunisia will accept this deal, and this deal will that has been reached between the Libyans in Morocco, but not in the Skhirat. This time was in Zniqat, in the I think suburbs of Rabat. But even though the Skhirat Accords of 2015, you know, Haftar has actually denied it, ignored it, and kind of made a coup against the Skhirat Accord. But this is, it's a new also possibility or wave of hope for the Libyan crisis. Yes, I agree. Tunisia and Algeria will welcome this, and because it will go and will work with the integral sub-regional system for the, especially for Algeria and Tunisia, because they are directly concerned by the Libyan crisis, so that Egypt. This is it. I can't see the clear questions. Is there any other question?
I think it's okay.
Are there any other questions? Because I saw only 3. Okay, but I can't see it. I can't see the questions.
Ustad, if you want, I can read for you one of them.
Please.
Why natural resources considered as a conflict factor in Africa's geopolitics?
Why the natural resources are considered
as a conflict factor in Africa's geopolitics, North African geopolitics, maybe.
Okay, North Africa. So the main two countries who are actually who have like solid natural sources, notably oil and gas, are Egypt. You can add Egypt also, but I was going to say Algeria and Libya. Here is because this, but I don't think, because both countries control the natural, these two main natural sources, and they are under the hand of the administration, and also it's the backbone of these countries. This is which leads to the again the uprising of the people who are saying we are wealthy people, and how come we are suffering socioeconomically and our life is not getting any better, knowing that we can be better according to those natural to the income of these natural resources. But as Algeria, for instance, the main income goes to the military and military budget, and it's a heavy burden on the budget as well. Another question?
Maybe I would like to ask about the future of these uprising today. Maybe Hirak movement or others.
Okay, what's the question?
Future of the uprising.
Yeah.
What will happen?
Okay, definitely. I mean, as long as there is or there are injustice, it will be a hirak, and the hirak means movement, and which means, I think I mentioned that during my talk, there is this movement, and people are not afraid anymore. And like the mask of, speaking of mask, is very interesting these days. It's not because of the COVID, but also because of the injustice. So the mask has fallen, and people are not afraid anymore. As long as the people in power don't answer those people's demands, the hirak, the uprising keeps going. But the only question here for this movement, they need to be structured. They need to have, let's say, a strategy how to conquer power, because otherwise they will be destabilized, because in our title was about the stability. And it's very, very important for these regimes to play with this instability factor, because when they see this kind of, let's say, faux pas or these immature actions, so they consider them as a chaos, and therefore they stop the process and they link it directly to the instability. So this is why all these, let's say, leaders, especially the youth or the young one, have to understand today it's imperative to have a strategy, to have a political program, to be in doesn't mean have to be in political party, classic political parties, but you have to think how to lead, or how to go and reach to the power and become a serious partner tomorrow.
Okay, then last question is about Israel and North African countries' relations. Do you believe that Egypt and the other North African countries will cooperate with Israel on Mediterranean issues?
This is a good question, because so we cannot say, sure, Egypt has diplomatic relations with Israel and has some conventions that are tied between the two countries, whereas the North African countries, up until today, none of them have direct or have diplomatic relations with Israel. And the question of this issue will become, I believe, in any lateral issue, because it's a sovereign question. So each country will decide according to its foreign policy imperatives and determinants. And also, again, speaking of current affairs, so we currently, or in these days, I see it's going to be very, very hard to predict. Like one of the Maghreb countries will normalize its relations with Israel, like happened last week between Emirates and Bahrain. Even though there are some talks about Mauritania, that's another story. We heard also about Morocco, but I doubt it. I don't think the Moroccans, or if the government and the king will jump quickly to such an eventuality. Whereas in Tunisia, Kais Saied has made it clearly during his campaign last year was no normalization. Algeria is very interesting. I mean, just last night, the Algerian president made a statement like he made the Palestinian question a sacrosanct issue for Algerian foreign policy. So he just, and then he added, I will speak about this during my speech tomorrow at the UN General Assembly. So therefore, I don't see will be kind of domino effect that with these people will follow Egypt to go with Israel and to support its ambitions in the East Mediterranean. Thank you very much, sir, and thank you very much for all the followers. Thank you very much.